Welcome back. The fallout continues from the atrocious behaviors by the three college presidents at the House hearing on anti-Semitism on college campuses a week ago. While Harvard President Claudine Gay is still in her position, she may be hanging by a thread as the reputation and prestige of the institution continues to tumble. Harvard applications for early admissions are down a whopping 17%. And even though Gay's testimony before the House came after the deadline for early admissions, there had been weeks of protests. And of course, you may remember the infamous letter signed by more than 30 student groups claiming that Israel was entirely responsible for the horrific attack by Hamas on October 7th. The letter was so heinous it prompted the doxing truck that roamed around campuses outing the students who signed it. They aren't the only ones who have been outed. To make matters worse for Harvard's reputation, their president, Claudine Gay, has been credibly accused of plagiarizing her work over her entire career, including her dissertation for her doctorate. Of course, Harvard conducted their own investigation and concluded she had done nothing wrong. But what was seen cannot be unseen, and by her victims of the plagiarism. Like Dr. Carol Swain, who had no trouble recognizing her own words, says Gay reportedly lifted entire paragraphs from her work and used it as her own. Swain wrote a scathing op-ed in the Wall Street Journal Sunday that not only took Gay to account for her cheating, but Harvard, who, according to Swain, holds minorities of a high pedigree to a lower standard. Swain wrote, "Miss Gay's damage to me is aggravated because her early work was in the area where my research is considered seminal. When scholars aren't cited adequately or their work is ignored, it harms them because academic stature is determined by how often other researchers cite your work." Ms. Gay had no problem riding on the coattails of people whose work she used without proper attribution. She then slammed Harvard for attempting to redefine plagiarism so that it can retain its first ever black president, who was clearly promoted based on diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. A DEI hire who to this day refuses to condemn the calls for genocide of Jews. Joining me now to discuss is Ian Haworth, political commentator and host of Off Limits with Ian Haworth. Ian, thanks for being with us today. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ian, it may be bad news for Harvard that applications are down, but good news that at least some high schoolers are rejecting the institution for their anti-Semitism. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this has been a house of cards for a long time, and that a lot of these institutions have just been living off their name. It's all credentialism. It's all people paying really an ungodly amount of money just to say they went to a college. I think the education they received there, especially in recent years, has been really appalling. It's not only woke, it's not only indoctrination, but it's simply not that good. You have a lot of people who can't compete with schools that people look down on, but are actually giving them a good education. And so you're just churning out really woke activists for an absolute ton of money. And so I think it's about time people woke up to the fact that a lot of these colleges are really just a scam. It's a way of squeezing out an awful lot of money from donors, an awful lot of money from students, and really getting nothing in return. I'm hoping that really this starts to snowball and that people don't just return to Harvard within a year, or that places like Harvard are forced to actually change their policies. But I think we're at a tipping point. So it's a great thing that people are actually waking up to the fact that just because you have Harvard on your resume doesn't actually mean anything, doesn't hold any value. The whole point of education should be to provide you with a set of skills that are useful for society. And I think when we look at Harvard in the last couple of years, it's been the opposite.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. So it is indeed very interesting to see this new turn of events here. I'm glad people are sort of waking up to the reality of this situation. Now, Harvard and Gay are not only refusing to protect Jewish students, but the victims of Gay's plagiarism, really. I guess when it comes to DEI, the end justifies the means, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we see this all the time where there are just two different standards for sets of people. I mean, look at the news coming out of the Senate of a staffer basically filming himself having sex in one of the Senate rooms or the Senate hearing rooms. And now he's claiming that the backlash is due to homophobia when sex in the workplace, newsflash, is not allowed. And so I think this is just the victim mentality that comes out of things like DEI, where everything is just used as a shield to really give people more power than they really should have. We've moved away from equality and just reshifting power balances in favor of people like Gay, who just want to really abuse their situation, abuse their minority status to really get away with things that we should hold people to account for. But let's also not forget that Joe Biden has a history of plagiarism too, and he's president of the United States. So maybe Claudine Gay after Harvard is has a place in the Biden administration somewhere.
Don't give them any ideas. I'm sure they might take you up on that. That's pretty wild. A great point, too. I hadn't put that together, but thanks for pointing that out, Ian. There's a shocking new and disturbing report that a majority of 18 to 24-year-olds think Israel should be ended, and worse, that it should be given to Hamas. What are your thoughts on this, Ian?
I think it's stunning and disgusting, but entirely unsurprising. If you look at what people are learning about Israel and Hamas and Palestinians and all these kind of things in educational institutions, they're being taught, again, the DEI stuff, that Jews are apparently all white, Palestinians are all brown, therefore Palestinians are victims, Jews are the aggressors, they're the colonizers, all of this nonsense. But this is also, I think, putting a dent in the idea that this is really just all about Israel, that all of the Palestinians oppose Hamas, all this kind of thing. I think the support Hamas is pretty clear, not only among Palestinians, where they have majority support still after October 7th, even though that Hamas are responsible for everything that is happening in Gaza still, but also the fact that when people march for supposed Palestinian rights on American streets and in college campuses, they're chasing down Jews. They're not even chasing down Israelis. It's all about Jews. And so I think this is proof that this is just contemporary anti-Semitism. This has really nothing to do with Israel. It's just Israel is the latest veil being thrown over anti-Semitism so that people can try and get away with it on college campus. It really is much the same way as Claudine Gay trying to get away with things by claiming victimhood. This is just decades, centuries, millennia-old anti-Semitism, just with a different hat on. And so I think it's horrific that the majority of young people in the United States think we should just hand over a sovereign nation to a terrorist group that is hell-bent on killing all Jews in the world. But unsurprising given what they're taught.
Yeah, I mean, do you think this is happening? The fact that young people are siding with literal terrorists who slaughter children as a result solely of college indoctrination, public school indoctrination, or is there something more that's contributing to this?
Oh, I think there's something much deeper going on. I think colleges are a huge part of it, but look at who the heroes of the left are. Look at Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And these people are hanging out with people like Jeremy Corbyn, who's a rampant anti-Semite in the United Kingdom. And look at other people like Louis Farrakhan, Al Sharpton. Every single person on the left has sucked up to Al Sharpton the last couple of years. It's like every single Democrat who wants to run for office has to go and kiss Al Sharpton's ring. And Al Sharpton has been arguably responsible for a bunch of anti-Jewish riots where Jews have been hurt or killed. He said things like during, again, these riots, if the Jews want to get it on, pin their yarmulkes back and come over to my house. And now he has a show on MSNBC and he's lauded as one of the key power players on the left. This is a problem with the left in that anti-Semitism is rampant and uncontrolled. I mean, anti-Semitism is a problem across the political spectrum. I'm never going to pretend it's not a problem on the far right as well. But the fact is that in the mainstream left, anti-Semitism is a problem. It's a problem in Muslim communities. It's a problem in black communities. And the fact is that the vast majority of the left, including these students, do not want to accept that. They want to focus on anti-Semitism as a tool to attack the right and nothing else.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Ian. And I have to ask, where is the ADL on this issue? Because they are so quick to jump and attack any conservative for being anti-Semitic, which sometimes is warranted, as you just pointed out. But I haven't heard much from them in regards to these leftist protests and the left's ongoing anti-Semitic attacks.
Well, again, that was my biggest criticism of the ADL. I wasn't coming out against the ADL quite as strongly as a lot of people were. I think the ADL do some good things. The problem in my mind is it's not consistent. I think if you have any kind of anti-bigotry movement, I think that's a good thing. But the problem is if you're picking and choosing based on an underlying political narrative, you don't actually care about bigotry. So when you have Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the CEO of the ADL, buddying up with Al Sharpton, I don't believe you that you care about anti-Semitism. I believe you that you care about anti-Semitism from people that you think are in, MAGA world or far right or all of these horrific labels they like to get terrified by. But when it's actually radical leftist anti-Semitism, it's kind of just crickets. I don't hear anything. And so I don't believe you if you're hanging out with Al Sharpton and then lecturing us on anti-Semitism. I simply don't believe it.
Yeah, it's hard to take anything you say seriously if that's the route you're going to go. Even after 9/11, the mantra was never forget. But now Americans are seemingly on the side of Islamic terrorism because it's the same ideology really behind the 9/11 and Hamas attacks. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all the same. It's all anti-Western. There's obviously anti-Semitism as part of that, but they hate the West. They hate Western Europe. They hate the United States. It's all much the same thing. And we're also seeing the naivety that comes from not really engaging with this truthfully. And so I think a lot of the key things about terrorism is the idea that you can just bribe people into not wanting to kill you. This was Barack Obama's mantra. It's Joe Biden's mantra. He's just copying Barack Obama. Again, more plagiarism. He's just copying him the idea that you can send these people money and they will leave you alone. And instead, they'll laugh at you, spend that money on trying to kill you. I mean, let's not forget on October 7th, Americans were killed. We have a lot of people talking about this as it's just a foreign conflict. It's just Jews versus Muslims across the world. So no, Americans were taken hostage. Americans were killed. The reality is it is not safe in the world for an American or anyone in the West or a Christian or a Jew or any other number of religions because of Islamic terrorism. And unless we look at this in the face and actually accept it for what it is and understand that Islamic terrorism has partnered up with radical leftism across the world, we're going to have to be dealing with this in much more difficult ways and ways that are much more closer to home than 5,000 miles away in Israel.
Yeah, I think you're right. And sadly, we may see that continue to play out as long as we allow this to continue. Very sad and scary times. Ian, we're all out of time for today, but thank you so much for joining us and weighing in. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.